We'll go ahead and get started today. I'm going to ask Dr. Kern if he would lead us in prayer, and we'll ask David Swather if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Dr. Kern, if you can come up here.
Father, we come in the name of Jesus. We thank you for the opportunity to come together here, the freedom that we have to assemble and to be informed. Thank you for these that have come to give us information that's important for us. We pray, Lord, your blessings on the food and fellowship. We thank you, Lord, for the many good things we see taking place. Help us to be willing to do our part, to be involved in reclaiming our nation, our state for you. We do pray, Lord, for our military and those in harm's way, protection over them. We do pray, too, Lord, for revival, an awakening amongst your people across this nation. That, Lord, we can return to our roots and be the kind of nation that you can bless once again. So, Lord, we thank you for it. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Flags this way.
Flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Chris Schaefer, please come up here real quick. I want to go ahead and give a gentleman here an opportunity from the Madison Project. Chris, if you can keep this in 2 minutes, I would appreciate it. He's up here from Texas today, and he'd like to propose something to you and find out your opinion. Chris, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Schaefer. I'm with the Madison Project, and we are a federal PAC that has endorsed and created many number of races. One that seems to be here closer to home. Oh, closer to your map. One that seems to be closer to home here is Congressman Bridenstine. Did I pronounce that correctly? Mm-hmm. Bridenstine, okay. We have currently endorsed in many races this cycle. We have endorsed Matt Bevin running against Chris McConnell. Matt Bevin running against Mitch McConnell, Chris McDaniel running against Thad Cochran. Great number of races, and we are here scouting, or I'm up here talking with groups, scouting out who the grassroots would support for the various seats, U.S. Senate, and then potentially CD1, CD5, things of that nature. So I'll be trying to visit with as many people as possible to find that out, and thank you for letting me come.
Let me say something here I think will help people understand. Your organization has already decided to support Jim Bridenstine. Should he run in the U.S. Senate race. And so I think what really you're wanting here after the meeting today, any of you that may have already made your mind up who you want to support in the U.S. Senate race, if it's Bridenstine, you might want to meet with him. As an organization, we're at this point in time, we will invite all the candidates for U.S. Senate to come here and speak. We'll do an endorsement in that race. So I have no position in it, and our organization has no position in it. But our members can do anything they want to do, whatever that is. If you want to support James Langford, we know he's in the race already, and I think that's probably the only one we know of, unless something's happened that I'm unaware of today. And Jim may or may not get in that race. We don't know at this point in time. To that point, as he mentioned Mitch McConnell and a few others that they're involved in races, and some of the ones that they've already helped to take out in the past. What we're talking about are either rhinos or actually neocons. The word neocon is a word they gave themselves. The word rhino is something we call them, and it means Republican in name only. But neocon means a new kind of conservative. And the John Birch Society has just produced a brand new DVD, and it's called The Neoconservatives Changing American Politics. If you want to understand what's gone wrong with the Republican Party, you need to see this DVD. And again, as I always say, all the Birch Society DVDs always have really nice covers on them. It makes them very expensive. Recommended contribution of $1 for them. And it's 23 minutes long. So I urge you to access these after the meeting is over with here. Okay, the next thing I want to mention is 1 week from Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday. It's probably the most important prayer day of the year, in my opinion, in Oklahoma, and that is the fact that Christians are invited to the state capitol. And this Sunday it will be, not this Sunday, but a week from Sunday, prior to the Super Bowl game. You won't miss any of it. You're invited to come between 2 and 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Both the House and the Senate chambers will be open. You can actually go and sit in the very chair of your personal state rep or your personal state senator. You can pray for them, because that following Monday, the session starts. In addition to that, you can leave them a note. Okay, now please hear me. Last year, someone acted like a jerk. I'm serious. We know who it was. It wasn't any of our people here. But the notes were nasty. And they were left over in the Senate. And the Senate wasn't going to allow us to do that this year. But Sally Kern worked and finally got it open. So if you can't leave a word of encouragement, don't leave a word. And actually, if you can't leave a word of encouragement, maybe you don't even need to be up there praying. Because what we're really wanting them to do is to be influenced by God for good. And so that's what I would urge you to do. And Dr. Kern, was there another issue here? What was the other one?
Friday the 31st is the Freedom Tour.
Right. Not this Friday, but a week from Friday, the It Be Liberty Tour will be here at this church. Is that 6:30? Huh?
6:30.
6:30. It's 3 hours long, 6:30 to 9:30. They've had two so far. There'll be one Friday night in Weatherford, one in Sunday night in Muldrow, and then the next Friday night will be one here. And they're having huge crowds. And the speakers are Paul Blair, Dan Fisher, and Mark Kreslins. And so I want to urge you, they're very much promoting the concept of nullification and interposition as the way and the means for putting the federal government back into its proper cage, proper constitutionally limited perspectives on government. So I urge you to try to go and see one of these, and that'll be right here 1 week from Friday, 6:30 in the evening. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get on with our meeting because we have a lot to do. Our first speaker is going to be Edmond Attorney Don Powers. Don and his wife GK over here are both law partners. None of the normal lawyer jokes apply to them. They're not bottom feeders or anything like that. They're not, snake sharks or anything. In fact, I would be more than happy to hire them if I need some legal work. But I will say this, that Don has on many occasions taught classes on the Constitution, and I think some on the Declaration of Independence, if I'm not mistaken. He's thoroughly studied this, and many of you may have already been through some of his classes. They're very, very fine. But today he's here to talk to us, and I think he has a legal case. I'll let him do that. But about smart meters. And there's been a lot of talk about smart meters. So Don's going to talk about that, and then we'll have another speaker after that. So please welcome Don Powers. Don, you can Okay.
Thank you, Charlie. And thank you, Dr. Kearns, and thank the church and your organization for allowing me to come this afternoon and talk to you. We are today inundated by our government and the number of things it does to us. It can't seem to do anything for us, but it's very easy for them to do things to us. And we have a choice today as to, none of us can fight all of it at a time. So one of the things my wife and I have decided to try and do is become active and help if we can in the war against smart meters. And my beautiful wife, raise your hand, GK, show them who you are. I tell everybody she's the best attorney in the firm. And she's really good. So I'm just kind of the support guy. But anyway, we do have, as Charlie said, some clients who have had problems with smart meters, and I'm going to try and introduce you to that issue today. As a matter of fact, our firm is a very small firm. When you see me and when you see GK, you see the entire firm. So this is David against Goliath. The corporations that we're going up against are like Oklahoma Gas and Electric, Public Service of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. These are the organizations that we have to go against in what we're doing. And we do have some current cases, and I'll get into those in a little bit. And I hope, Charlie, you'll give me a 2-minute warning when my time is getting close. Okay. First, I want to talk a little bit about how many of you have smart meters on your home? How many of you know that for a fact? Okay. How many in here know what a smart meter is? Well, that's pretty good. How many of you know what frequencies the smart meters transmit on? Okay. Well, in the system that they're using here in Oklahoma, the smart meters transmit on 2 frequencies, one in the 952 megahertz range, and another one in the 29 megahertz range. Now, you may ask, well, what's the problem with that? It's just a meter on the house that reads the electricity. Well, yes it is, but we'll talk a little bit about what creates the problem. And I'm going to do that by mentioning some of my clients. A client who had a smart meter installed on her home, and within 6 hours, she was bleeding from her nose and having severe problems. And she has not been well since. I have another client who has had problems with the smart meters, and she's pretty well confined to her house. And there are a number of people that have problems with these things. And you might ask yourself, why? Well, the scientific fact is this, that anywhere from 3 to 15% of the normal population is immediately sensitive to exposure to what we call non-ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation is the radiation that occurs from such things as microwaves. And that's what these meters work on. They work on microwaves, like cell towers, like Wi-Fi systems that are in this room. Well, you say, you know, that's just in people's heads. Well, it's really not. The history on this is kind of interesting. I've been researching this for over 2 years, and it's my considered conclusion from everything I've been exposed to that the smart meter problem will be a bigger problem than the cigarette issue and secondhand smoke issue as far as your health goes. I don't think there's probably too many in this room who can say, well, I'm feeling better today than I did 10 years ago, because I doubt that that's true. But anyway, let me give you a little background on this deal. You know, this country went to war back in World War II. We had to take on the Germans and the Japanese, and we were very blessed to be able to have scientists and engineers and to be able to manufacture the tools of war that we needed. And to win this war, we invented certain devices such as radar, UHF radios, and other devices. It's even been reported that during World War II, we even had a machine that would stop an airplane engine while it was flying in the air. Well, I had to use microwaves to do that. Anyway, we researched it and started building devices to use militarily, and one thing led to another. all of a sudden there was a whole industry of things that were working in the microwave frequency band. And one of the interesting things that happened from that was that during the Cold War, the Soviets got the idea that, hey, we could eavesdrop on the Americans at their embassy using microwaves. So, well, the Americans found out about this because they found out pretty quick their embassies were being bombarded by microwaves, but they didn't tell anybody that worked at the embassies. They just said, well, let's study this and see what happens. So they allowed the embassies to be bombarded by microwaves by the Soviets for years and years. And the scientists studied it, and as a result, I think that what the report said, that was anybody that served at the Russian embassy for over 4 years came down with cancer. And that was due to the exposure to microwaves. And believe me, at that time, the Russians were using microwaves that were less powerful than what are used today in our cell phones and cell towers and smart meter systems. Yet you get that kind of an effect. Well, scientists from the late 40s through the 50s and into the 60s began studying these microwaves. And all of their reports that they made, and most of these studies were done for the federal government, and all these reports that they made, they reported to the government and said, hey government, these things are dangerous to human beings, and you better be careful with what you do with them. And you better be careful with the information about this, because you don't want people to know this. And so they kind of kept it quiet. Well, you know that when President Eisenhower left office, he gave that famous speech where he warned us about the military-industrial complex and what it could do. And we all thought, well, we just have to watch out for the fact that they might be in cahoots over contracts and stuff like that. Well, no, I think he meant for us to really watch everything that they did, just like George Washington told us to watch everything the government does. And what the government did was they went ahead with research. They developed all these systems that our military use, and now that our telephone companies and our communication companies and everybody else use, that are actually harmful to us. And they didn't tell anybody. They choose not to. The way they get by with this is they do this. The power that these systems use, these wireless systems, is governed by FCC standards. And the FCC standards are developed by an industry group. And so they set the standards, and then they decided to decide whether something was harmful or not in these wireless devices. They decided, we'll just use thermal effects for our way to measure whether there's any harm. Now they measure these thermal effects by taking a dummy made out of rubber and putting a thermometer through its head, stuck into some water, and then they turn the device on and expose it to the microwave output. And if it doesn't raise the temperature, then it's totally safe. Well, it's probably never going to raise the temperature the way these things work, the physics of it. But that's how they determine that it's safe. However, if you do a biological study and look at the effects of these frequencies of the microwaves on living matter, you'll find in every case, or just about every case, that the organism is affected in some manner or other. I read one research study that was on a single cell sea creature, much like an algae, and they put it in the laboratory, isolated it, and they had a whole colony of it in a vat, And they exposed it to the very least transmitted amount that the laboratory could make. It killed every one of them. Then there was another interesting story, or study, I should say. A group of scientists said, it appears to us that anywhere there's an Air Force base, we're getting cancer clusters. And other scientists said, that's curious. We ought to study that. So they did. They went and they studied a number of different Air Force bases, different locations around the globe. And they found that there was that positive correlation. Wherever you have an Air Force base, you have cancer clusters. Why is that? That's because of all the UHF, all the microwaves, all the instrument landing systems, all the radar and stuff that's used, all the equipment. Another interesting study. In India, they found that they had cancer clusters around, huge, significant cancer clusters, around 300 of their cell towers. So they decided, we'll move those towers into unpopulated areas. That's the only choice they had. So, there's plenty of science that tells us that this wireless stuff is bad for us. We should not have Wi-Fi in our children's schools. The use of cell phones is questionable. And, but you ask the question, why are we having problems now? Why are we having problems now? You know, when we had the old analog meters on our house to measure our electricity, we weren't having some of the problems we're having today. I think we've reached a saturation point of frequencies that our body can deal with and handle. But everybody who is exposed to these things is going to have an effect at some time or another. Some people are more sensitive early on, others will become sensitized later on. You know, it used to be you had, I think it was 10 years ago, you had a 1 in 4 chance of having cancer. Today, you have a 4 in 4 chance of having cancer, which means if you live long enough, you're going to have cancer, period. Why is that? Could very well be because we're doing it to ourselves. But I find it extremely interesting that these utility companies who are pushing these so-called smart meters, particularly the two here in Oklahoma, PSO and OG&E, they both obtained stimulus money from the federal government to buy these meters and put them in place. And they're going to put them in place, and then they're going to raise your rates to charge you for it. How you like that? What's that do? That puts money in their corporate pocket at your expense. Now, what's really bad about this, though, is that there are alternative ways to install these meters that cause no problems for anybody. They can be installed using telephone lines to report or fiber optic, either way. You do that and they present no danger to anybody, except they still represent a Fourth Amendment problem. Now, what is that Fourth Amendment problem? Well, one reason they call it a smart meter is because the meter they put on your house is able to communicate electronically with smart appliances, which the manufacturers are building. In other words, your refrigerator can talk to your electric meter, your dishwasher can talk to your electric meter, your dryer can talk to your electric meter, your washer can talk to your electric meter, your thermostat can talk to your electric meter. As a matter of fact, the utility, if you have smart appliances in your house, can control your appliances through the smart meter. Now, when we had analog meters, I think the utility companies had seven different kinds of accounts that they kept for an individual customer, based on usage and other things that they could record with the analog meter. With the smart meter, I think they have well over 4,000 different types of things that they can record and measure. They know when you get up at night and turn the light on. They know when you flush the toilet. They know when you move your thermostat. That's the kind of things that these things can do. Smart meters are only designed for one thing, and that's control. They're not designed to help you. They're not designed to save money. They're designed to make more money, put money into the pocket of the utilities, and to take it out of your pocket. That's the only purpose of it. Well, I take that back. How many of you have heard of Agenda 21? I find it extremely interesting that one of the goals of Agenda 21 is to depopulate this country. And so we have all of a sudden this rush and push by the government to install all of these meters that aren't good for us and will eventually lead to a cleansing of our society, so to speak, at the same time that they're wanting to put into place Obamacare, which is no care at all. So the bottom line is, the government doesn't care about you one bit. You better care about yourself, and that's why, as an attorney, I'm representing the clients that I am relative to these smart meters. Because they are dangerous, they actually hurt people, and they're not needed. So, I'm involved in, I have 2 issues before the Corporation Commission right now. We're waiting to hear rulings on those before we decide what else we need to do. We've been in court in Tulsa against PSO, and so it's going to be a long battle. And like I said, David is going against Goliath. And it's going to be a long, protracted fight. Now, how many of you have OG&E smart meters? Have any of you complained to them about it? Did they just write you a nice letter back and said it's going to be good for you, so shut up, something like that? Yeah, that's kind of the response. They told the Corporation Commission that they didn't get any complaints at all.
I didn't even get a letter back.
That's typical. If you complained about it, they just didn't really respond to it. Well, my clients are having that same problem with the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. So don't feel alone. Yes, sir.
Well, we're not going to do questions right now. We're going to do both of our speakers, and we'll do questions afterwards. So.
But anyway, that's kind of the background on smart meters, what they do, and why they're a danger. And you guys need to be doing something about it. You need to write it. Actually, the state senate is going to take up a few bills to try and look at this and try and limit the effect of smart meters. You ought to write them and encourage them to continue pursuing those types of efforts. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll be happy to answer questions when it's time.
Okay. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Dave Bond. He's with a new organization. He's the CEO of a new organization called OCPA Impact. And Dave will tell you what that's about. I actually, Dave didn't know this before now, but I got involved 30 years ago, and it was his grandmother that took me to the Capitol the very first time and began to teach me the ropes of how to maybe lobby and do some things like that at the state capitol. And I think Dave was pretty young and pretty small at that time. So anyway, at this point in time, Dave is going to use PowerPoint here, and We are working the Wi-Fi system in doing this, but anyway, Dave's going to do his presentation, and please welcome him. Dave, good to have you here today, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. It's a great privilege to be here. Charlie didn't mention that as my grandmother was at probably the exact same time, probably just later in the week, taking him around the Capitol for the first time. I may have been little, but she was taking me around too. Thank you for having us today. With me is Baxter Llewellyn, who works with us at OCPA Impact. We are an affiliate of the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, the free market think tank, which you may be familiar with. OCPA was founded 20 years ago as a source of information on how to make Oklahoma's economy grow by expanding economic freedom. And obviously that takes a lot of different forms, but a couple of big forms that conversation takes is one, limiting the growth of state government, and perhaps even someday reducing the size of state government, which occasionally states are able to achieve. And two, by lowering the cost burden that government places on citizens, in particular through taxes, and in particular through the penalty on work. Oklahoma's income tax. Oklahoma is one of 41 states that has a personal income tax. And we call that the penalty on work because, quite frankly, that's exactly what it is. 41 states in our nation at large penalize each of us who get up and go to work each day, basically saying that that's an activity that we want to discourage in America. I think that's probably backed up by the fact that huge chunks of Americans are incentivized not to work. So it's an interesting dynamic we have going on in our nation today. We are going to present some info to you today about how there are some very strong correlations that can be drawn between those states that do not penalize work or that penalize work less than most other states, and the rate at which those states are seeing an inflow of investment and capital and correspondingly jobs and opportunity. The resource we're going to share with you today is from a book and a website and a mobile app that you can access just by plugging into your Ethernet instead of the Wi-Fi, but you can do it either way. And it's called How Money Walks. And let me give you a very brief explanation of what they did. Not to raise any red flags, but from 1992 to 2010, the IRS makes data available for 1040 tax returns, not names, but the data associated with those returns by region. And what they have done is, pairing that with census data, tracked how adjusted gross income, AGI, often considered a key indicator of where jobs and opportunity and capital are moving from state to state and nation to nation. And what were the patterns in nearly a 2-decade span? Who were the winners? Who were the losers? And for our interests, how does Oklahoma fit into that picture? So if I pass over something at some point, feel free to stop me or ask me questions at the end, whichever is preferable. But real quick, let me just show you a few things. From 92 to 2010, there were some clear winners and losers in America. You can see from this map up here, I'm sorry it's not a little bigger, but...
Stand as close to it as you can for the camera here. If you
Right,
will, please.
trying to stay out of its range at least. The green states are the winners that had a net, when you looked at net of all transfers of AGI in and out of the state over that 2-decade span, they saw a net increase in AGI, or a net increase in working wealth, a net increase essentially in that state's investment capital, from which many jobs and opportunities are produced, as we all know. No big shocker that some of the biggest losers in that dynamic were some of the states that penalize work and productivity the most. States like California, which was the biggest loser, a net loss of nearly $50 billion over a 2-decade span in private sector capital. Another one that's of interest probably would be the state of Illinois. And some of these states obviously have problems beyond penalizing work. Many of these have, California has a lot of environmental overreach, Illinois has a lot of union overreach, but Illinois, loss of nearly $30 billion, $30 billion worth of investment, worth of jobs, worth of opportunity, et cetera, savings, on and on and on. There's also a metric that shows how much that equates to in the last however many seconds. Another really big loser, we'd probably not be surprised to learn, would be the state of New York.
Get ready to lose a lot more.
Big shocker. $68 billion. Yeah, and that was with some, I don't want to say conservative mayors in New York City, but at least not with socialist progressives in New York City. And again, you can also see the trend line, and I'll come back to this here in a second, the trend line of how a state is performing. New York has been going down, as probably no one's surprised to learn. New York gained wealth from one state, net of all transfers in that period of time, the state of Michigan. No other state was a net contributor in working wealth to the state of New York, and that's a similar story with some of the other high-tax states. Correspondingly, we see a direct correlation when you look at this data with states that are winning are either fitting in one of two categories. Either they have no penalty on work, no income tax, or a relatively low overall tax burden when you combine their income tax and their sales tax and their property tax, or they're located next to, sometimes an and/or, located next to a really high-tax state. So every state around California is a net winner regardless of their tax rate, because among other reasons, California has the highest tax rate in the country. Tiger Woods left his home state of California to go to Florida because he was getting fleeced. So even Oregon, which has a relatively high penalty on work, was still a $7 billion net winner. Some of the biggest winners in America over that time, like Arizona, Nevada, Washington, are nearby. Most of the Rocky Mountain and Northern West states were net winners. A couple of the other winners that we'd not be surprised to learn, the biggest winner was Florida. I was talking with RC prior about how Florida is doing well, how they bounced out of the recession quite handily, despite being one of the hardest hit states by the housing market bust. Florida gained nearly $100 billion, billion with a B, over that time span, and is going up, gaining from New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, high tax, Rust Belt states. Texas was the third biggest winner. Arizona was number 2, but Texas was the second biggest, with a net gain of almost $25 billion in AGI over that time frame. A majority of the job creation that happened in the United States of America during the recession happened in the state of Texas. That's not because they have 70% of the population. Some other interesting parallels here, when you're looking at those states that either have no income tax but are still thriving with this particular economic metric. Granted, this is just one of many that are tossed around from time to time. But when you look at the 8 no income tax states that are in the continental US, any economic analysis of the 50 states, Alaska and Hawaii are both going to be outliers. So the 8 no income tax states in the continental US, all 8 of them were net winners in working wealth gain during this 2-decade span, regardless of their population, their geographic location, regardless of anything. So a couple examples of that. We talked about Texas and Florida, but let's talk about Wyoming. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Wyoming has 1 congressional seat. They may have over 1 million people, but I think they just have 1 congressional seat. Gained nearly $1.5 billion in working wealth and investment capital, job creation, etc. in that 2-decade time span. You look at the Midwest corridor. You look at the Midwest corridor right here. Texas is the only state that saw a net gain. And keep in mind, this goes up to 2010. This is before fracking really took off in North Dakota. It's before the state of Kansas had the biggest tax cuts in America in the last 2 years and also reduced the size of state government in their state in the last 2 years. It's before those things happened. So Texas is the only winner in the Midwest corridor, except for no income tax South Dakota. Only 1 congressional seat. I believe they have less than 1 million people, total population, but saw a net gain of nearly $700 million, which in South Dakota is a lot of money. Okay, so Tennessee, another big winner, kind of relative in size to population-wise to Oklahoma, $10 billion net winner. What about Oklahoma, where we are today? A few things. Oklahoma lost nearly $1 billion net of all transfers in working wealth, investment capital, job opportunity, individual opportunity, economic expansion, nearly $1 billion outflow net of all transfers over a 2-decade time span. Let's look a little closer at this, because this is very close to home. I talked about the trend line earlier. A couple things. When you look at the trend line here, you'll notice we go down, 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 and then we began to climb out of the hole in 2005. And many of you may remember that 2005 is the year in which Oklahoma passed, signed into law, and began to implement the largest reduction in the penalty on work, or state income tax, in our state's history. We began lowering the penalty on work by 20% over an 8-year span. It's now run its course, finished up in 2012 with the tax cuts that were scheduled at that time, and we've been climbing out of the hole ever since. Right to work is great, but this does not correspond with right to work. The growth of fracking is great, but this does not correspond to the growth in fracking. It doesn't correspond with legal reforms. It doesn't correspond with a lot of things. It does directly correspond with Oklahoma reducing its penalty on work. And taken as a single snapshot in America, maybe that doesn't mean a thing. But in our opinion, when you look at the pattern across the rest of America, with the history of reductions in the penalty on work in the history of America, particularly in the 20th century, it does add up. Another really interesting thing, I don't know if you can read it from here, but when you look at the 5 states we gained the most wealth from, net of all transfers, number 1 by a mile was California. A net gain of nearly $700 million from the Pinko Commie socialists out in California. And a lot of people see that and say, yeah, that's awesome. Reverse grapes of wrath, and probably only Oklahomans would understand what reverse grapes of wrath means. Maybe some of the writers at the New York Times do, but other than that, that's probably about it. We also gained from states such as Kansas, Michigan, Illinois, New Mexico, which has a lower rate than we do on work, but is not a right-to-work state. And granted, that was during Kansas's lost decade. They had a lost decade, kind of like Japan, which is why Brownback has gone in there gangbusters with what he's been doing. Okay, so we gained $700 million from California. Yeah, high fives all around. And then you look who we lost wealth to. Well, we lost over double, over twice what we gained from California to 2 no-income tax states, Texas and Florida. So that wealth, that opportunity, that job potential, that opportunity for our kids and grandkids to stay here in this state, instead of going to Dallas and Houston, came in from California and we sent it right back to Dallas and Houston. I don't think there's a huge surprise then when we continue to lose many of our best and brightest to those places. We can dig a little deeper. This breaks down to the county level. On the web app, or I'm sorry, on the mobile app, you can also look at it by metropolitan statistical area or, city, basically. Tulsa County, real quick. You can see the trend line there. They've been a net loser in Tulsa County. And I will say, for most urban core counties across America, regardless of what state they're in, they're often losers. And the suburban counties surrounding them are often net winners. So that's not a huge shocker. You can rub it into some of your friends in Tulsa that Oklahoma County did not lose as much as Tulsa County did, but we were still a net loser here.
Taxes aren't as high.
Well, that's a good point. An interesting thing, though, when you look at the urban core counties and our suburban counties as well. So let's look at where Marcia and I just moved to with our 2 sons, Canadian County, one of the bigger net winners in the state with a $350 million net gain over a 20-year period, essentially. Most of that coming from Oklahoma County, no big surprise. But we're still sending out significant portions of that wealth. I mean, you look at where we lost wealth to. 4 of the top 5 were to, or 3 of the top 5 were to counties in Texas. You look at Cleveland County, you look at Logan County, you see a similar pattern. In Tulsa area, you see a similar pattern in Wagner County, Broken Arrow, Rogers County, Claremore, Creek County, Bristow. We're stealing from ourselves, but we're still a net exporter of wealth and opportunity to other states, primarily Texas and Florida. The points we are trying to get across with this, I hope are clear. Maybe they're not. We're trying to make them more and more clear each day. Our organization has a twofold purpose. One is to, as a 501c4 organization, which we are, to take the message about reducing Oklahoma's penalty on work and thereby increasing individual opportunity here in the state directly to the state capitol. That's a big part of what we do. The flip side of that conversation is growth of government. The more state government grows, the harder it is to have the conversation about reducing the penalty on work. Not that the two can't happen Not that you can't reduce the penalty on work and still grow government. It happens. Ronald Reagan reduced the penalty on work and the size of government grew because the private sector economy grew because you took off some of the inhibitors on work and productivity and investment. And we've all heard that example before. Oklahoma, though, has actually experienced very similar dynamic effects. We talked earlier about 2005, biggest income tax cuts in state history, ran their course through 2012. Well, you may have read about this budget hole that state government has here in Oklahoma at our state capitol this year that people are freaking out about. Most of the roads are going to be shut down. Most of the schools are going to close. In case you haven't gotten that memo, that's going to happen.
Didn't get that memo.
No, but, well, it depends on who you read. You don't get it from Charlie, but what is not being talked about very much is in the last full fiscal year, so I guess that's the 2013 fiscal year, Oklahoma saw the largest total tax collections from all revenue sources in our state's history. I believe we saw either the highest total income tax collections or very close to it in state history for a full fiscal year. Despite having reduced the penalty on work by 20%, you'd think our revenues would go down, right? Well, no, they went up. Sales tax revenues have gone up by even a higher percentage. Total tax revenues in state history, we're bringing in more revenue to state government than ever before. And we would say it's not a shocking coincidence that happened when we began to remove some of those inhibitors on work and productivity in our state. Again, back to the trend line, of our state as a whole, it's going back up now. And it's not necessarily slowing down, it's continuing to go up. However, we have taken our foot off the gas in reducing the penalty on work. The tax cuts signed in 2005 have ran their course. There is nothing scheduled past that. As you all know, we had a tax cut signed this past session that was thrown out by log rolling, so now we start from scratch. We're encouraging lawmakers in the Capitol to take that step and continue reducing the penalty on work by as much as they think is logistically possible in a budget scenario like they're in, but clearly reducing the penalty on work and productivity has corresponded with increasing tax revenues. There are some proposals out there to do that with the bill filings amongst the some odd 1,000 bills that were filed next week, most of which probably, well, anyway, there's a lot of bills out there to do stuff in government. There were a few that were filed to reduce the penalty on work, and I think that's worth noticing. I saw a headline this morning where Governor Fallon is planning to announce some type of reduction in the penalty on work in her State of the State address. That's a good sign. And I think it's a response to the fact that with Kansas, over the last 2 years, dropping their rate from considerably higher than ours to now lower and scheduled to go further in the years to come, we're now in an income tax sandwich. I don't think it's a coincidence that when you look at the national map, we're in an income tax sandwich between Kansas, which has a lower penalty on work and now a lower total tax burden than we do, and the state of Texas, which has no income tax, no penalty on work, and despite their higher property taxes, which we've all heard horror stories about, they still have a lower overall tax burden per citizen than we do here in the state of Oklahoma. Nebraska, 2 states above us, is also in a similar situation with Kansas to their south and South Dakota to the north. I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the second year in a row that their governor, Dave Henneman, is proposing to figure out some way to get rid of their penalty on work. Scott Walker, he could be celebrated for the rest of his career now as the guy who successfully took on the unions in one of the toughest states in which to do so. But he's not stopping there. This year, his big ticket item is try to get rid of the penalty on work. Bobby Jindal tried to do it last year, ran into some roadblocks, but every indication is he will continue to make that move. And the states around Illinois are trying to do it. Indiana just saw a reduction last year because they're seeing these jobs fleeing Illinois and bypassing them for Texas and Florida. And they don't want that to happen. This is a tax competition between states, but it's more than that. It's also a competition for where our best and brightest, i.e. our kids and grandkids, are going to spend their adult lives. What I mean by that, you may not be able to see it from here. I apologize. I meant to have it on the screen, and I failed to do that. But these are my young sons, Owen and Mason. Owen is 3, and Mason just turned 1 and just started walking in the last 2 weeks, and he is living it up. And it's pretty exciting. But the reason we get up and do what we do each day at OCPA is because when they reach, hopefully 22, and maybe they've gotten a college degree by that point, if it's still affordable, they're going to have choices. And like so many of the folks that Baxter and I grew up with, maybe we went to college with or went to high school with, they have found that when they survey their choices about pursuing opportunity, pursuing the best ways to provide for their families and to achieve the American dream, well, I don't want to say more often than not, but far too often, those opportunities are not in this state. They are often in Houston, they are often in Dallas, they are often south of the Red River, and so many of the folks we know, so many of your kids and grandkids, or some family member or friend has made that choice, and now they're not as big a part of your life as they might have been otherwise. And that's just the way it is, unless we change it. A big part of what we're doing, I talked about taking that message straight to the Capitol. The other big part of what we're doing is we want to be the conduit that folks who want to impact that conversation with their state lawmakers can have some easy opportunities to do so. If that sounds like it would be something that would be of interest to you, I would ask you to at least take a look at our website, OCPAimpact.com. There's a video of a guy we probably could have picked a better face for that, but we just do the best we can on the budget we have.
Serious.
Yeah. But if that's something that you would like to be a part of, if you'd like to get an action alert, when there's a vote on reducing Oklahoma's penalty on work coming up in a committee or before the House or before the state Senate, and you want to be easily patched through to your legislator to tell them that they need to reduce Oklahoma's penalty on work without jacking up some other tax to pay for it, just bring the tax burden down. Bring the burden of government down. Don't raise one other tax so you can cut another. Reduce the tax burden, particularly by reducing the penalty on work, which is proven time and again to be the most onerous tax charged by government, at least in modern times in America. I'd love to take any questions. I'm probably past my allotted time. I apologize, but thank you.
Don, come on up here, and folks, if you have a question, please work your way to the microphone over here. Okay, go ahead.
This question is for Attorney Powers. In regard to the smart meters, I'm aware of what they do. I have one in my house, but something very strange happens at night while I'm sleeping. I have my computer and all the accompanying devices plugged into an extension cord which has a surge protector on it, so it's got a red switch that turns it all off. And during the night, when I wake up, because I'm old, the red switch on that is blinking at an extremely rapid rate, like a disco ball. And it only does that at night. It does not do it during the day. I don't know if that's something from that smart meter or what the heck it is, but it worries me.
Well, more than likely it is related. I have what is called a gigahertz meter, and what it does is it's a field strength meter, and it measures these types of emissions. And one of the things you find out is whenever they put in a smart meter system, the system is more active and is full blown in operation sometime between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And so there is something going on electronically at that time if you're in an area where these smart meters are active. One of the symptoms that people have from exposure to these microwaves is sleeplessness. It's difficult for people to get to sleep. What the radiation does is it reduces the amount of melatonin in the body, which helps you go to sleep. And people have difficulty sleeping. That's one of the symptoms. And so if you're up every couple hours or every morning at the same time, it could be from the smart meter system. Very well could be.
Okay, Pastor Kerner.
My question has to do with the taxes, lowering taxes and all that. And of course, my wife has battled this thing all along because there has to be cutting somewhere. Are you giving any kind of suggestions to the legislators as to what kind of agencies or where is the places where they can start cutting spending? Because that's the big problem. We're big spenders here in Oklahoma.
I appreciate that question very much. I I'll say two things, but first, I would like to publicly thank Representative Kern. I didn't see her today, but in the phase-out conversation, phasing out Oklahoma's penalty on work 2 years ago, she was one of the authors of the legislation to do that, and that was much appreciated. A couple different things. One, the first step is to stop growing government. When you look at total state government spending in Oklahoma over the past dozen years or more, it has increased every year when you factor in all federal funds and all funds spent essentially by the state of Oklahoma. It's gone up each year. So not increasing government year after year, not expanding Medicaid, which would boost that by likely hundreds of millions of dollars a year. That's just one example. We do work a lot with the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, our sister organization, and they have produced for years a state budget proposal that includes many different options for reducing Oklahoma state government spending. Some of that's through efficiencies, like the way we deliver healthcare benefits to state employees is not nearly as efficient as it could be made while still maintaining the same level of care. So that's just one example. I mean, we still spend money in state government on rodeos and golf courses, so clearly we've got some fluff to cut. You say that in a town that has a state lodge, you might get some dirty looks, but it is what it is. I would say one thing more to add to that point. Again, sometimes in our nation at large and in other states, to be totally blunt and honest, I want to be forthright, a reduction in the penalty on work or a lack of a penalty on work does not necessarily correspond with smaller state government. Many of the states with no income tax are seeing their government revenues grow faster than ours, primarily because their private sector economies are growing faster than ours. It is interesting, though, Baxter and I saw an analysis recently of state government spending per capita in each of the 50 states, and most of your no income tax states and low tax burden states spend less in state government per citizen. In other words, they're more efficient with tax dollars than we are here in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
for that question.
Bob.
It's funny, it started to take all the time. I think I'll send the electric company the bill. David, thank you very much for what you're doing. I want you to appreciate it. I have two questions for you, and that is the whole issue of the budget and the budget process at the state capitol. Done at the last minute. It's this thing that I don't understand at all. All right. Your organization, do you do anything to bring a light on that whole process? We get more engaged as citizens. You know, that'd be great. That's number one. Number two is this whole issue of debt. All right. I wonder if you've looked at any kind of correlation between what's going on in growth of states and the amount of debt that they assume.
Normally debt is an inhibitor to growth in any circumstance. I don't know that we've seen a direct, crystal clear correlation between states with booming private sector economies and their corresponding level of state government debt. That's not to say it's not the case. I just haven't seen it. That analysis may be out there. As far as the budget process goes, it used to be in the state of Oklahoma, and this has changed within the last 10 years, that we broke out the budget process by individual state agency. And there was an individual spending bill for each state agency. Some states do it that way, some don't. Within the last 10 years, we started rolling all that into one big, ginormous omnibus spending bill. And so if you want to vote for teachers to get paid, you might also have to vote for some projects that would make your stomach queasy. And so our lawmakers are put in a very tough position. We have recommended, and will continue to do so, that they break that back out by individual agency. It gives more opportunities for oversight and involvement, for one thing, for the public, not just for the public, but for legislators to have more oversight of that process. Because the logical step would be to take that through the different appropriation subcommittees instead of just through the appropriations committee itself. And as I said, folks who sign up on our website to receive action alerts from the organization will not just get action alerts when an income tax reduction bill is coming up. They'll also get alerts when bills are coming up for votes to either reduce state spending or not grow state spending. So that will be that is going to be a part of our approach as well, and we will be providing those opportunities. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
David, let me hitchhike on that just a little bit. Actually, within the last 2 or 3 days, there's been an editorial in the Oklahoman, and I've also received an email, and I believe it was regarding fiscal soundness of the of the different states. And it may address some of those very things that you were asking about, Bob. with debt and other things like that. Debt is a part of the soundness, the fiscal soundness of a state. And I think it probably will begin, and I don't know if you've seen the editorial on this, it was a significant editorial, but Oklahoma is actually ranked pretty high in fiscal soundness, partly because we're not carrying debt, we're not financing our economy through deficit spending in the state. Now, we obviously have federal dollars come in their deficit spending, and that's very unfortunate. But another thing you need to realize, this is 2014. When did the Republicans take over in the House? 2004, 10 years ago. When did they take over in the Senate? 2008, just 6 years ago. And I know we get mad at our Republican lawmakers, and many times with very just reasons. But I can assure you this, folks, that the change since Republicans have been in control in the state are pretty dramatic if you really go down the line and look at the differences in the governance. But we have a long ways to go if we really want good government. Okay, Betty, and this will be the last one here.
Okay, this is more of a comment to Don's presentation. I recently had a test made that showed that I have high amounts of EMF and radiation. The radiation probably coming from Fukushima. But on the EMFs, and doing some research, there are companies that can manufacture equipment that you can cleanse a room and keep it cleansed. And also, as far as your individual body is concerned, you can do cleansing for that, which will keep the toxins coming out. So that's all my comment.
I'll respond also. Let me piggyback on that. First of all, I want you, nobody in here, to take anything I said as the truth. The truth is out there. You can go out there and find it for yourself. Confirm everything I said. If you'll go out and look for it, I think you'll confirm everything that I told you. But you need to do that for yourself, so the facts particularly. Because I don't want to lead you, I don't want to mislead anybody. I'm telling you what I think is the truth as I know it from the research I've done, but you need to do your research. As to what she mentioned, one of the things about the effects on the body of EMF radiation is that if your body gets out of it for a while, your body can, in some cases, recover. One of the things that they can look at is they can actually look at your blood under what they call black light, which is ultraviolet light, and they can see the shapes of the blood cells. And if you've been exposed to this and have a problem with it, your blood cells will be misshapen. But if you're out of that for a while, they come back to a normal shape. There's studies out there that tell about the effect on reproduction, the effect on different biological systems and everything. So there is a scientific relationship between microwaves and biological harm. And a smart meter is harmful up to 300 feet away. So you get dosed not only by the meter on your house, but by every meter around you. That's why it creates a fog in the community where it's at, and it irradiates people because that meter system, to stay calibrated, has to operate and do parity checks on itself thousands of times an hour. So that during a whole 24-hour period, you get exposed anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000 times with doses from that system. The utilities will only tell you, no, it's safe. It only transmits once a day or 4 times a day or whatever like that. Well, yeah, it only talks to their computer about 4 times a day or once a day whenever they set it up to do that. That doesn't mean it's not active out there and broadcasting thousands of times an hour, because it is. That's the way the system has to work.
Rick.
My name's Rick. I just it's on smart meters. I'm more concerned with the Agenda 21 and all that than I am the health concerns, even though they're legit. I know people that live under high lines, they've done studies there, the EMFs. have caused cancer rates to rise and all that. But I was luckily at home one day when they tried to come first install my meter, and I told them I didn't want it, and the guy left. Then I put a note on my meter with duct tape that wouldn't just fall off that said, "Do not replace meter." And a few weeks later, I come home and they've replaced my meter. Do you have any recourse? Can you stand your ground?
Under current law in Oklahoma, you have no recourse, because the Corporation Commission has approved what these utility companies are doing, and therefore it is law in Oklahoma. And that's why it's extremely difficult to get anything done about these, because other states are, pretty well do the same thing. Oklahoma does not allow you to opt out. The federal law says that this program is supposed to be an opt-in program. In other words, you're supposed to tell the utility that I want that meter, so put it on my house before you get it on your house. That's not the way they're working.
Okay, Dave has one statement he wants to make, and I'll close it out.
Thank you. Baxter is passing out right now. If you're interested in learning more about how money walks, the author of the book and the website that we were just referring to, Travis Brown, is going to be at a special deal on Saturday, February 15th in Tulsa. Our organization and Americans for Prosperity are partnering with the Tulsa 912 group to put that together. We will also have Steve Anderson, who was the budget director for Governor Brownback in Kansas for the first 2 years of his administration, will be there telling the Kansas story, so you can get some of that information firsthand. Baxter is passing out info about that right now. There's a place you can RSVP. There's a Facebook page that has more info. We'd be happy to answer any questions afterward as well. Thank you.
Okay. And, Kansas's miracle takes an Okie to make that happen. Steve Anderson's actually my neighbor. He lives 3 properties down the street from me and drives up to Kansas every week and is their budget director up there. So, and by the way, our governor could have had him as her budget director, but didn't choose to do that. I will say, yes, Bonnie, real quickly.
Yeah, no, it says on here that the summit is January 11th of this year, and that's already gone by. Is it February or something?
February 15th. I'm sorry, it is February 15th.
Yeah, and I will, if you will get that information to me, Dave, I'll put it in there. Chris, would you please stand up, Chris Schaefer here? If you want to see Chris, if you're interested in helping with one of the campaigns he's involved in, see him afterwards. Another thing I want to mention to you, if you've not joined OCPA yet, please do so. Our membership forms are back on the far end of this table over here. And this is going to be a critical year. Things are happening so fast, our head is swimming right now. And we're going to need all the revenues we can to put the right kind of people in office. One more thing, next week, we're going to have 2, possibly 3 survivors of the USS Liberty, which was attacked by Israel in 1967. They will be our speakers here next week. And I think you'll find that to be an absolutely fascinating meeting to hear from these 2 or 3 fellows that are going to be here as our speakers next week. Thank you for coming.